Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. It was a cold one this week in the Northeast, but we are here to warm you up with another episode of The Eagle, hot off the presses. I'm Jessica Marshall. There is a lot to talk about with state and national government news right now. Obviously, President Donald Trump's inauguration kicked off the week, and on Tuesday, New York Governor Kathy Hochul unveiled a $252 billion budget. That's the largest of her tenure.
Many families do continue to struggle. Nationwide inflation, the rising costs at the grocery store, every month working New Yorkers having to face such difficult choices on how to stretch all their dollars. That's why this budget is laser focused on putting money back in New Yorkers' pockets.
Hochul proposed a middle-class tax cut, an expansion of the child tax credit, inflation rebates, free school lunches, and free college tuition for older students, among many other things. But one thing she didn't talk about, wigs. Wine in grocery stores, that is. Quick story here, I spent the Thanksgiving holiday in Boston, and I wanted to buy a bottle of wine to bring to dinner. I was staying with family, and I asked them if they could recommend a liquor store where I could go grab a bottle. "You can just go to Shaw's," they told me. "Shaw's?" I said. "Isn't that a grocery store?" "Yep," they said. It took me a moment to remember that in Massachusetts, you can actually buy wine at some grocery stores. I had a similar reaction when I went to a supermarket in Canada once and walked by a massive wine aisle. As a lifelong New Yorker, I'm just not used to seeing wine where I buy my groceries. My brain defaults to liquor store when I think about where to get wine. That's because grocery stores and supermarkets cannot sell wine in New York. It's been illegal for decades. There have been on-again, off-again efforts to push for a law to allow wine in grocery stores for more than 40 years. But they've always been defeated by a powerful liquor store lobby, whose argument has been that selling wine in grocery stores will do immense harm to mom-and-pop liquor shops. The argument in favor of wigs, that's again wine in grocery stores, of course, is not merely to make it more convenient for the average person to get wine. Advocates, which include the New York State Farm Bureau and the Business Council of New York State, they argue that it would be a boost to the state's winemaking industry. A Siena Research Institute poll from 2023 showed that 75% of New Yorkers are in favor of having wine in grocery stores. And there's a renewed push this year, in 2025, by several lawmakers with a new bill on the table. Times Union table hopping Steve Barnes has been covering this issue recently. I will let him take it from here.
All right, we're here today talking with David Rosenberg. He and his wife Colleen have owned Bricks Wine and Liquor in Malta for 12 years. And I wanted to have you on today, David, because after I wrote a column last week in support of wine and grocery stores, you, as the owner of a standalone independent wine shop and liquor store, had some thoughts on the matter. So if you would, tell us first, what do you think? Are you in favor of wine in supermarkets? There may be some caveats or additional considerations you like, but in general, what do you think of having wine available in supermarkets?
Well, if this was a yes or no question, I would say no, but it is not a yes or no question. I think there's many things that have to be considered before something like this could happen. And first and foremost is the small, and I'm going to use your term here, mom and pop stores that really have been existing in the format as is for much more than 12 years, much longer than us. And for them to pivot or shift away from that would be difficult. I think there's a lot of issues involved in the decision process of whether or not this happens or not. And first and foremost is how would that come to be? And what I mean by that is, does all of a sudden wine be treated like beer and other beverages, or does it continue to be handled more like it would be on the liquor side? Specifically, right now, there's only one owner for each individual wine and liquor store that you see, and that you go to. And in the event it becomes available in supermarkets, does just one supermarket within that chain, be a Price Chopper, Hannaford, we all know the names, or is it every store universally, much like beer is handled at this point?
Right. And that, I think that's an important point people may not understand. If somebody owns a restaurant, for instance, that they can have 8, 10, 12 restaurants, they could have 50, and they could get a separate liquor license for each of those. Whereas you own this store with your wife. If you wanted to expand, you would have to dissolve the corporation that has you and your wife in it, and then she could go open her own store or something.
Or one of us surrender as an officer in the corporation. That would be the only way it could happen, and then that would have to go through the process of approval by the liquor authority as well. And
you are extremely limited in what you can sell. Yes. People, like, if you go over the border in Massachusetts, you go into a shop that will have wine and spirits and beer and cider and cheese and picnic baskets, and all sorts of things. And yet I found this list on the State Liquor Authority's website. A liquor in its entirety, you can sell wine or wine products, cider and mead, lottery tickets if you get a license, corkscrews, ice, magazines or educational things about wine, non-carbonated, non-flavored water, wine glasses, wine racks, devices meant to minimize oxidation after opening, gift boxes. And that's it. That's all you can sell. You can't sell. And if you think about a supermarket that can have 40,000 some products, you can't sell many of the things people would like to buy with wine, including, we've finally got some decent NA wines out there, and you can't sell those, right?
That's correct. And the same thing goes for cocktails as well, too. Now there are many cocktails out there that you can buy that are non-alcoholic, but give you that same flavor profile. I'm not going to say identical, but the same flavor profile.
Right. So, and you're precluded from selling that.
We're leaving out things like olives for your martinis and cherries for your Manhattans.
Right. So I can't be a one-stop shopper for my wine and cocktail needs. I need to go somewhere else. And if someone like Empire Wine, for instance, has a huge warehouse size, they've got a storage warehouse, and then they were able to open something called Empire 2, which is another warehouse that has all of the NA products and complementary things that you might want. And if you're in the unique position of having the massive sales volume that they do, you can do that. But how big is your store?
2,500 square feet.
Okay. And how many SKUs do you have? How many separate labels?
Oh, it varies. It probably goes anywhere from 900 to 1,100, somewhere in that neighborhood.
If you were offered the opportunity to sell additional products, more complementary things, have you thought about how to reconfigure the store? Do you have room for it? Some of the smaller places that are in supermarket strip malls will say, we just don't have the room for it. I mean, 2,500 is a pretty good sized store, but could you accommodate a change like that?
So let me clarify that 2,500 does include storage space, not in its entirety. So probably sales floor alone were more like 2,100 square feet. We also positioned ourselves 12 years ago when we opened to be somewhat prepared for an event like this to happen. And we have been focusing on important aspects we see that we're missing in the business, that specifically being hospitality and education. So we have a tasting bar, we have the ability to use glassware, conduct seminars and things along that line. That is what separates us from the guy next to the supermarket. What would I sacrifice? I probably would have to give up some of our floor displays, which would limit the number of products that I could offer. We most likely would have to consider removing the tasting bar to accommodate as well. If food products came into line, we'd have to get ourselves compliant to all health standards, which means steel prep areas, running water. There's all
refrigeration.
Refrigeration, yes. Prior to this, both of us were in the restaurant business, so we're well aware what that would take, and there would be labor-intensive labor costs added to that as well too.
Now, if wine was allowed in supermarkets, could you? Because in other states where it is allowed, stores like yours become boutiques that specialize in harder to find things and also in having a staff that knows what they're talking about. So somebody can educate a customer that you're not going to get in a Wegmans and a Price Chopper where they're all just going to be on the shelf. Would it be a viable business model if the Barefoots and the Kendall Jacksons were all being sold in supermarkets and you brought in smaller producers for wine connoisseurs?
Again, we've kind of had that in mind when we opened the store, and that is what we're doing right now. We have a area for wines from Italy and an area for wines from France. Those both have, I believe it's 24 SKUs each. It's 48 SKUs each. South America and Australia share a rack that's 12 SKUs each. So we've kind of prepared ourselves for that event, and we're a little bit more of the model that you're describing, but we don't have additional products. If I may, I'd like to get to why I wrote to you, and I wanted to point out some of the things that we are up against already. And in the event that this legislation is considered, I really feel there should be some strong compromises for stores like ours. We already talked about the non-alcoholic products that we could have. There are some other things that we are holding our hands. The first one is, which I didn't talk about to you in my response, is if wine becomes a product like beer where it can be going to anywhere, that would create a price level that would be impossible for us to compete with.
If Price Chopper were able to buy for all 133 of their stores.
Exactly.
Right.
I think,
and you gave me an example that, for instance, if a bottle of, it was a Magnum of Jack Daniels, your price on that is how much?
It's roughly $52.
And
if I were to buy one bottle, now
right, if you were to buy one bottle or even six or something, but if you bought 100 cases, is that the example you used for me?
Yes, I did.
You bought what does your price fall to?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said $42.50.
Yeah, and so right there, you're knocking more than 20% off the price.
God, yes.
Because, but then what do you do with 100 cases? Where do you put 600 bottles?
Well asked.
and that's just one. That's just one. Those are the big bottles of Jack Daniels. And so when you extrapolate that out, so I do see that, and already there is some unfairness in buying among liquor stores. People that can buy and have warehouses to store it. Mm-hmm. So, from what are you hearing from the liquor store associations, from your representatives, your lobbyists? The executive budget was just introduced, and there was zero in there about changes in alcohol reform. There was a nice addition of an amazing 30% bump in the state liquor authority's annual budget, which will allow them to improve licensing times. But you got a license, so that doesn't help you. But there's nothing in the governor's budget about alcohol reform. So what are you hearing from people who are on your side?
It's an interesting industry in that we don't have a lot of communication with each other, but those that I do have, you're right, there are lobby groups that you can join. I've elected not to. I was really upset with how they handled the cannabis situation. I really thought that was something that should have been pushed for us to be able to sell. So I see them entirely focused on this issue, the wine and grocery stores. They continue to fight. They must be effective because it still hasn't come to fruition. But for that to be their only fight, I didn't feel that was an organization I could support. And I did initially support and participate. I went to lobby day one day and the whole 9 yards for probably about 3 years. The other issues that they were fighting for didn't seem to become important or get the impact that they're having with the wine and grocery stores. One that I will cover that I feel is important is when we are beyond terms with a purveyor, just one, and I probably deal with 30 different suppliers, we are put on COD, cash on delivery.
Well, you mean, just to be clear, you mean behind. Like if you owe somebody, if you get behind on a bill for one purveyor, you have to go COD from all 30?
Yes.
Whereas you said you were a restaurateur. If you don't pay your produce guy, okay, your produce guy is just not going to deliver you produce, but it's not going to affect whether you get beer. It's not going to affect your meat purveyor. It's not going to affect all that. But here, across the board, you become COD, which means you've got to have all that up front instead of being able to pay for it a month later.
Yeah, or get off COD, one or the other.
Right, right. So have you spoken to have you called a legislator? Have you said, hey, we need help?
Yes, I have.
And what sort of response did you get?
Open ears. They understand there's a process. I understand there's a process. It's not one person making these decisions. I think it's an entity, the legislature, and their efficiency and time is not, especially when it comes to these matters, is not important enough or not happening.
Right. I mean, I first found a mention of this about alcohol reform laws need to be changed starting in 1968 and then again in 1980 and then basically continuously from the mid 90s. And I did a massive story on it related to issues about the SLA in 2008. So here we are 17 years later, and there doesn't seem to be any progress on this. But I do appreciate you reaching out because you've got valuable insight that people don't understand some of the extreme limitations that you're under. And it's not you would sell other things if you could, because you wouldn't make people, especially in dry January and when the rise of NA products and people using cannabis. So there's, it's a difficult industry. And I appreciate you bringing your views to Times Union consumers.
My pleasure in that respect, and I appreciate being heard. And if I have one point that I want to make sure all hear and understand is that if it comes to this, there has to be reasonable compromise back to the stores that only have things taken away from them.
Thank you, sir. Be well.
All right, thank you, Steve.
For exclusive State House news and analysis delivered to your inbox daily, subscribe to our Capital Confidential newsletter. Head over to capitalconfidential.com, that's capital with an O, and sign up today. And if you want food and dining news, sign up for our table hopping newsletter at timesunion.com/tablehopping. We are going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we will get the lowdown on this year's Times Union Best of contest.
Why is healthcare so expensive? What's happening with climate change? And are elections safe? You can find answers to those questions and a lot more with Capital Confidential from me, Dan Clark. I give you the latest news and analysis from the state capitol and beyond. Sign up now at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O, confidential.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. It's the most wonderful time of the year here at the Times Union. Our annual Best of the Capital Region contest is here again. It's the 27th year of this exciting poll where our readers get to nominate and decide on their favorite people, places, and things in the region. Joining me now on The Eagle is Times Union features editor Gary Hahn. He's going to give us the scoop on this year's Best of. It's the time of year again that comes around and gets us all excited here at the Times Union. It's the Best of. Nominations are officially open. Set the stage for us. What is Best of 2025? How is it different from last year? What's new and exciting about it? Give us the 35,000-foot view.
Okay. Well, we always try to retire some of the categories. Some people take a look and say, whatever happened to Best of whatever, Best of Old Sofa? And we say, well, that didn't do well last year. So we try to retire some that either have been on the Best of for a long time and need a little bit of a rest, and then bring in some new categories. Maybe some of them were actually around 10 years ago, and we're bringing them back out of retirement. But some of them are new because, our region is always changing, and there's always new things to do that maybe people didn't think of doing 15 years ago.
So you follow the trends, right? Like year after year, you see what people are doing, and that kind of informs the choice of categories, right?
Yes, the features department here at the Times Union get together, and we kind of toss all sorts of ideas back and forth with each other and say, what are people doing? Well, how are people living their lives differently? And then from then we kind of go forward. We don't change a great deal of the Best of poll because, again, a lot of businesses really have depended upon the readers' say on how they do, and they're very proud of that. They put their Best of stickers on the sides of their vans and in the windows of their establishments. So we have to be very careful not to get rid of categories that I think some businesses and some people really depend on.
Society changes, right? So there's different things that kind of force you to merge or take away categories, right?
Well, one of them being the pandemic. So for a few years, we lost best concert venue and best concert I've seen in the past year because there were no concerts. So we couldn't go in that direction. Those are two of the categories actually that are back this year.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's talk about what's new this year. So you just mentioned the two that you have brought back. What else is new?
Well, in the past few years, we've done things with like Best Trivia Night and things that people go out for and they gather for a good time. And all of a sudden we said, well, we've never done an actual happy hour. What lures people? What places bring people out on a Friday night or any night actually between that 4 and 6 o'clock magic 2 hours to go for the specials? And we thought, well, that could spur some interest, and we'd be surprised at the results. A couple other categories that are brand new are best place to bring your pet, which I think is people look for. I mean, there's dog parks, but there's also a lot of other. Is there a hike? Is there even an urban walk that you think your dog or cat, those who leash their cats, would
because
enjoy?
We know people do walk their cats. It's a thing.
Yes, exactly. So that's a new one this year. And then my personal favorite is best drag queen performance, because I know drag brunches and all sorts of drag events have become very popular with the Capital Region audiences, and we have never gone in that direction before. So we're looking forward to what people have to say about that.
That's exciting. So what do you think from, your vast years of experience running this, what do you think is going to be the most popular this year? What do you think is going to have the most votes, most nominations, all that stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, people love their Italian food in the Capital Region. There's the chains, of course, but even the mom and pop, the Italian restaurant that you see that looks like it's been in an old house and renovated into a restaurant, those are strike a popular chord with the audiences out there. So that's one that always does well. Mm-hmm. And then there's it's a general one, like your best town. People have great pride in where they live, and so that brings out a lot of votes as well. So I think that's those couple of categories I think are always going to be near the top of the list.
What's going to be the most divisive, right? So in past years, I remember talking to you and Sarah Tracy about some of the categories that, came down to neck and neck votes. Like one year it was grocery store, how Market 32 keeps flip-flopping with Hannaford or whatever it was. Like, what are going to be the most tight categories?
Yeah, well, I don't want to weigh in too much to affect. You
don't want to influence anything.
Right, exactly. But I mean, you picked it. Grocery stores are always tight. Hannaford and Price Chopper always are very neck and neck, and hospitals as well. The two major hospitals here have always competed very well against each other. It's those categories where the readers' votes actually counts. I mean, people may throw up their hands about how their votes counted in actual elections, but in this poll, their vote has a chance of actually tipping the balance and giving us a new winner. And we always like to see new winners. We love our tried and true winners, of course, but a good upset is always exciting, I think, both for the readers and for us as well.
Yes, absolutely. I cannot wait to revisit this after everything is said and done and see how the results all shook out. Is there anything else that you think is important to know for readers going into this competition this year?
Yes, I think the most important thing is many best of contests out there are run by magazines and others, and people always raise an eyebrow and say, okay, how much does advertising, how much is this a pay to play kind of thing? The proudest I feel about our own contest is that it is truly reader driven. And even though you may see ads on the sites around the nominations, they are just ads, and they're in no way influencing how people vote. People will vote their conscience, and I think that's what's made this a high level of engagement and last as long as it has. So, and that's because of you readers. So that's what I'm proudest of.
Nominations are open, folks. You can nominate your Capital Region faves right now at timesunion.com/bestof2025. Nominations close on February 5th, so get on it. And mark your calendars. Voting starts February 23rd. That's it for this week. We will be back next week with another look inside our newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times-Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Steve Barnes and Gary Hahn for their contributions to this episode. If you have questions or comments about the Eagle or any of our other podcasts, don't be shy. Please email us at podcast@timesunion.com. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast driven by CDTA.